Alright, hello everybody and welcome to Soundwave Mania 2. It is the start of a new tournament, and with that of course means the start of the qualifiers. And this pool is going to be 7 stages long, so it will consist of 1 hybrid, 3 race, 2 LMs, and 1 hybrid. But without further ado, let us get into our first qualifier, which will be our SV qualifier. It is going to be complex. This is going to be more of a reading-based SV. I do believe this is a reuse from Mania World Cup 2023 round of 16, if I'm correct. So this might be an SV that's familiar to some people. So some people will have that advantage of knowing what happens, which can be bad for other teams, but this SV isn't really anything too complicated. It's mostly just basic reading, and you can kind of see here there are a few ghost taps, which are mostly just to stay in rhythm throughout the whole thing. As throughout this SV, there are some parts where you'll see kind of like a pause, where you would expect notes to come in right away. So you could use ghost tapping to your advantage if you are having a little bit trouble with this qualifier. And I would say this first half of the SV is fairly easy compared to the second half. And within the second half, I would say is when we start to really see things rip up just a little bit. Not too much, of course, but I think it would be a little bit noticeable, at least in terms of accuracy. I mean, so far it's mostly just the same. This part mostly just being within 1-1s. And I believe 1/4 just before you get into the next jump. I would say this part here is probably one of the harder parts, especially since you kind of get a little bit of a mix-up when it comes to that rhythm. These parts having some 1/3s in between, and of course you do have a few elements to be careful of, which aren't inherently too hard, but in terms of hacking them, and of course this being SV, can make them just a little bit more challenging. So that does conclude our first qualifier, and moving on to stage 2 will be R for Vital by Mint. I do believe this is also another MWC reuse for qualifiers. This might be 2022, or I think it's 2022. but this will be your technical pit for the qualifiers. And it's not too difficult. Also probably one of the more easier ones within qualifiers. There are a lot of mini jacks that are prevalent, and of course this is a tech pick, so you do kind of have to expect that, at least coming from a tech pick. But getting into this part, you do see a little bit of kind of bird jack patterning with some bursts in between, so this could definitely be an area where you're able to build up accuracy. I would say it's mostly the burst that would probably trip you up, and especially like the faster burst. The kind of notes in between shouldn't be too difficult, but I just think that it's mostly the fact that you're kind of having to do this, and of course you do get some jump stream like you see it here. And then moving on to this next part, it's kind of just jump stream, like dense jump stream with some mini jacks in between, so it's nothing too complex, but it definitely can be a little bit tricky to hold good accuracy when it does come to these types of patterns, especially if you just aren't used to this kind of patterning. And more so just the same but a little bit slower, but we are going to start to ramp things back up following this part right here. This being basically just another build-up to get more of those mini jacks and more of those first. And you do see races as well, which are probably also going to be the hardest things to kind of hold accuracy on, especially on a qualifier like this. It's definitely going to be one where a lot of people are able to hold FCs and get high scores in general, but in terms of kind of optimizing your play to get as little perfects as possible, this one's definitely going to be a lot on the trickier side. And to get this ending here. And that does conclude our second qualifier. And then moving on to stage 3 will be Campanella. This isn't going to be the MKCC one or the MWC one. This is going to be a completely different one, but it does follow the same gimmick if you are aware of the MKCC one, with just it being jump stream and stream. So it is a really simple qualifier, but clocking in at 227 BPM, it could be a little bit awkward for some people to hold accuracy on. It's not too dense, I would say, either. And I would say you do get a little bit of breathing room in between these streams as well, such as here where we see just a little bit of chord jack and not that continuous pattern. And coming back right here with this jump stream, you see some hands in between, and I would say it is also a little bit trilly, but also the fact that it's slow BPM could make that either easier or harder for people. Mostly just because if you're good at this game, then you might find these slower patterns to be a little bit more awkward to play, especially if you are more warmed up. But this could also just be tricky to hold accuracy on, just because first, the trills are also in place. So it's kind of 50-50 whether or not you'll be able to play this, but if you are able to play a qualifier like this one, it should be fairly simple. I would say these bursts are probably the easiest parts to lose accuracy on. Other than that, it's mostly just a game of consistency. And then getting into this final part right here. It's mostly just the same thing again, but of course it is the ending, so your stamina could potentially be running out, especially as the patterning does get slightly more denser. But that does conclude our third qualifier. So we can move on to stage 4, which will be Feels Left Out. this might also be another pick that some people are familiar with. So this is going to be your mixed rice, and as you can already see, there's a lot of different patterning. You do see some of those phrases that add a little bit of challenge in terms of accuracy, but you also see a lot of kind of pattern that's more focused in terms of jacks, but also burst as well. So you're gonna have to juggle both of those at the same time, which can be really tricky. And I would say most of the difficulty does come from these first, but you also do get a little bit of a break here. But things ramp down a lot more. But then it will continue to ramp back up. I would say this is probably as tricky as stage 1 in terms of technicality. But of course this is a lot more physical compared to stage 1, so you already have that challenge of having to hold good accuracy, and of course you're also going to have to deal with that physicality factor, which could be an issue for some players. But for a lot of players it also won't be a challenge, so it'll be mostly dealing with the awkwardness between these qualifiers. Yes, we do get to the end. That will conclude our fourth qualifier and our final rice qualifier. And moving on to stage 5, we can go on to our first LN qualifier, which is going to be Shiba Island. I believe this is going to be our coordination qualifier. Yeah, this is our LN coordination qualifier, so another pick like stage 2 where a lot of people might be able to hold kind of high scores, hold FCs, but the main difficulty of course will be having to hold good accuracy and of course coordinate all these elements, which on top of all of what I just said can also just be another added challenge. I wouldn't say there's too much LN strain when it comes to playing something like this, but there is a lot of really tricky patterns to kind of hold on to, and tricky in the sense that you're kind of doing multiple things at once. But you do get these patterns right here, which could be tricky to add. So it is a little bit of a mix between raw trickiness and trickiness in terms of holding good accuracy. So this is probably another one of those qualifiers where you're gonna have to be really careful and hope that you don't choke or mind block when it does come into this. But just like stage 2, it is more of a less physical demanding qualifier. And most of your rates are probably going to come from these releases that are scattered around. Like right here, where you're kind of having to deal with multiple of these releases, and in a sense almost staggered releases, but not fully staggered. I would say this kind of ending here is probably one of the hardest parts to hold good accuracy on compared to everything else, especially as you're trying to hold most of these elements. And even the ending just being really difficult as you're doing so much, ending off with that staggered release. And we can move on to our 6th qualifier, our element density qualifier. This is going to be Stethno. This is going to be our LN density qualifier, so maybe a bit easier to hold good accuracy on, but definitely more tricky in terms of holding your combo and keeping up with a pick like this one. And I would say this is potentially easier to get accuracy on for the fact that it might be a little bit more simpler to hold accuracy on, but it's definitely going to be a lot harder to keep up with a pick like this one. And you can see there are still some tricky patterns within this pick, but it's not as bad as the coordination, at least in my opinion. But you're still having to deal with Ellen Strain, and I would say you're going to deal with Ellen Strain a lot more when it comes to this type of pick, because you're doing a lot more at once, and of course you're having to hold it out basically at all times. I mean, there's barely a moment where you're not holding it down, which is already another added difficulty to these qualifiers. But you do get a little bit of a break right here, which I wouldn't say is a complete free accuracy area, as it is a slower LN, and I would say this is a little bit more on the, I guess you could say, coordination side, where you're having to do multiple things at once, but at a slower pace. So it's not that full-on density that we've been seeing, but as we do get past this, we will go into that shortly. I would say this is probably the harder area to hold good accuracy on, and potentially an area where you lose accuracy rather than gain it. These LMs, so even the short parts can be rather difficult to hold good accuracy on. I would say it does ramp down just a little bit right here as we do get into that build-up. And then here we go, moving on to this ending. And this is where you start to see your more density favored pattern. You see some switchers in terms of density, which can be a little bit difficult. But this is definitely a pick that I would say could be pretty competitive, just because it is a pick where if you're able to play it, you're going to be trying to optimize a pick like this one as much as possible. And given its, I guess you could say, simplicity in terms of hacking it, not as simple as the maybe Rise qualifiers, but it is on the simpler side when it does come to Ellen. As you do get into ending, we will be concluding our 6th qualifier. Nothing really too much. You do see some Rise patterns, almost hybrid-ish, ending off with patterns, which you might get a grade or 2 on, but I wouldn't say it's too bad. Now we can move on to our 7th qualifier, which will be Black Sour Ruby, and this will be our hybrid wildcard. So this is another ranked qualifier. So some people will recognize this. Some people might also recognize this from being used in another tournament. I know this was used in NFT 2, but this was also used in another tournament that I just can't remember off the top of my head. But as I said earlier, this will be your hybrid pick, so potentially another pick that can be really competitive, especially given that it has a lot of leaderboard scores on it and really high accuracies as well. Especially as we do move forward through the player, you get a little bit of a techie rice area, which can be really hard to hold right. So it's definitely a pick that could be really hard to hold accuracy on, and I would say this is a pick that kind of combines both physicality and just trickiness in terms of accuracy. I would say kind of similar to stage 4, where you did get a bit of that physicality jump, but you also did have that factor of the pick just being hard to hold good accuracy on. And I would say this is no different. While you don't have a pick like this in the other qualifiers, I would say this definitely does make up for it. And in a way, you could kind of say this is almost like an LN3, especially with these kind of LN parts. But of course, you do get those right sections, and you do just kind of get those mixed sections in general. And this ending definitely can trip up some people, especially with the double jump, the jump jacks. But that will conclude our qualifiers for Soundwave Mania 2. So Good luck to everyone who plays in the qualifiers, and remember to schedule. Well, that should be up within the next few hours or within this day. But I've been your commentators, No, and thank you for watching.